Welcome to another live internet study. My name is Ariel Ben Lyman Hanavi. This live study is 1.5 hours long, 2 segments. First segment is 1 hour long. It's entitled Eschatology, a Biblical Study of End-Time Events. We're studying really prophetic topics. Right now we're looking at rapture timings, but we're working our way towards the book of Revelation. The second segment is entitled A Trinitarian Response to Biblical Unitarianism. It's 30 minutes long. It's apologetic in nature, and we're dealing with Trinitarian versus non-Trinitarian issues. So I hope you can stick around for both parts. Let's jump right into the first segment. This, as you can see on your screen right now, is entitled Eschatology, a Biblical Study of End-Time Events. Here is the sort of topical index that we're working from. We've missed 2 weeks. We missed last week. We're 2 weeks later right now. If you're watching this recording on YouTube or listening to the podcast, it's 2 weeks later than our latest show. I missed a week because of a personal illness. We are in topic 11, making a case for the pre-wrath view. So we're talking about rapture views. So what are they? There's 4 basic views that are kind of primary today. There's really 2 primary and 2 secondary, if you want to think of it that way. One of the more popular views among Protestant evangelical Christians is pre-tribulation rapture. Within the 7-year time period of history that's identified by many Christians as the tribulation, 7-year tribulation, the rapture simply takes place at the very beginning or prior to any bad stuff happening. So thus it's labeled pre-trib. That's if the entire 7 years are the entire tribulation, pre-trib rapture. That's a primary position. Next position is really kind of a minority position, but it's called mid-tribulation rapture. It takes a 7-year time period and simply puts the rapture smack dab right in the middle after some bad stuff, but before the really, really bad stuff. That's where it puts tribulation. That's where it puts rapture. The third position in my list here is called post-trib rapture. It's considered a majority position by today's standards, by popularity and such. It's held by a lot of messianics, to be sure. A lot of people who jump ship from pre-trib typically jump all the way over into post-trib. That's just kind of the trend, the way it goes. But same 7-year slice of history, and the rapture takes place at the very end, meaning Christians go through tribulation, but they also go through, according to this version, this model, they also go through wrath. And how are they able to go through wrath when there seems to be verses that suggest that we shouldn't? Like 1 Thessalonians 5:9. Well, the way that works is that this position believes that God will supernaturally protect us somehow through the wrath, and that's how we're able to go through it. And then the last position that we're working from is a minority position. Again, remember I said of the 4, there's 2 majority and 2 minority. The 2 majority are pre-trib and post-trib, and the 2 minority are mid-trib and pre-wrath. So pre-wrath is the final version that we're talking about. It takes the same 7-year slice of history. It breaks it up into 3 segments this time. Reading from left to right, it's got beginning of sorrows for the first half of the 7 weeks, 70th week, 7 years. Then it's got a midpoint. Then it's got the Great Tribulation, which commences after the midpoint. Then it's got a segment at the end called the Day of the Lord, which, according to my reckoning, is probably about a year long. This chart doesn't show it as a year long, but this could be a good assumption based on certain passages out of the Tanakh, the Old Testament. But the Day of the Lord is the last segment of the 7 years, and the rapture takes place just before that. So the name indicates that we don't go through wrath, but we do go through tribulation. So the pre-wrath rapture, in its most simplest definition, is a post-trib, pre-wrath rapture, where the rapture takes place sometime after the 6th seal of Revelation chapter 7, but prior to the wrath of God being poured out. We don't know when the wrath will be poured out. We're not saying we know exactly. This chart is just an approximation. We're not even saying that we know based on its approximation to the sixth seal, that we know exactly when in the 70th week it will be poured out, when it's going to be initiated. We're just simply saying it's after the sixth seal, that the rapture is after the sixth seal, and yet the rapture is before the God's wrath, or before the day of the Lord. Okay, so last week we left, 2 weeks ago we left off. We're within a discussion about this topic of when the day of the Lord commences. There will be simultaneous back-to-back events that Jesus uses the language of on the same day, using these examples from the Tanakh, the Old Testament. And the two primary examples that show up in Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the days of Noah and the days of Lot. And so the resource that I'm pulling from right now is Brother AARON Eggman's book entitled "The Saints Go Up and the Wrath Comes Down," and his website is available online. His website is accessible online, and the book itself isn't reproduced in its entirety online, but there are excerpts from the book, and we're using some of those excerpts by permission from Brother Eggman. He gave me written permission to use those excerpts and teach them in my own YouTube series here. So this is where we left off last week. If we look at what Yeshua gives us in the Olivet Discourse, that is his discussion to the disciples about when the timing of the coming of the Lord occurs within the sequence of all of these calamities that happen, then Jesus describes his coming like unto the days of Noah and like unto the days of Lot. And so this chart is where we left off. So I'm not going to read this chart. We read it 2 weeks ago. Let's pick up our slideshow and our teaching right after that slide. So this is Brother Eggman's blog. Every word you're reading here is Brother Eggman. None of these words are mine. These all belong to Brother Eggman. Okay, I want you to make sure you know that. So let's pick up our reading right here. The stories of Noah and Lot relate to the conditions of the world leading up to Jesus' return. Noah and Lot's lives provide a biblical prototype for what life will be like on the earth for both Christians and unbelievers. Jesus will rapture those who have prepared themselves for his return, while the rest of the world is caught completely off guard in the judgment of the day of the Lord. Let me just briefly interject. I don't want to interject too much, because I think Brother Eggman's words are self-explanatory. But he's talking about something that's very important. Jesus uses terminology such as coming like a thief in the night. He describes his arrival, his return, like a thief in the night. And thus, he warns us believers, his followers, to be on guard, to be watching, to be ready, to be waiting, to keep ourselves awake. He uses these metaphors of and examples and parables and symbolism of a thief breaking into a house. He later on goes on in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew, later in the latter half of Matthew 24, as well as going into chapter 25 of Matthew. He brings in these parables of the a master who has a field and workers, and the master goes away on a long journey, and the workers are told to keep doing the master's business, remaining faithful with the talents that they've been given, things like that. And then the master will return, and he's going to settle accounts with his employees. And so in that metaphor, again, the general idea is that we need to be ready because we don't know when the master is going to return. He also brings in this parable in Matthew 25 of these 10 virgins. 5 are foolish, 5 are wise. And the bride is waiting for the bridegroom. And the bride doesn't know when the bridegroom is going to return. And thus, she has these lamps with oil, and she's to keep her wicks trimmed and the oil in the lamps because she doesn't know when the bridegroom is going to return. Well, he comes at an unsuspected time, and 5 of the virgins were foolish. They don't have oil for their lamps. They beg the 5 wise to give them oil. The wise say, no, go out and get your own. And then while they leave, the bridegroom comes, and so only half of the bride is prepared. And then the analogy, the main picture that's being painted of this thief in the night gets picked up by Paul in his Thessalonian letters about the coming of the Lord. The day of the Lord is like a thief in the night, right? 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, I believe it is, or it might be 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. But in his Thessalonian letters, he talks about this day of thief in the night language. And then Peter also picks up on this thief in the night language. And then Jesus himself mentions behold, I'm coming like a thief in the book of Revelation, or right around, I think, chapter 1. So what's the point? The point is, in all of those stories about the thief in the night returning, one of the central features, and Paul brings this out the best, is that the Lord's return catches unbelievers off guard, but it also catches those who say they're Christian but truly aren't. Those who are unprepared. Remember, the virgins are all virgins. They're all part of the bride, and yet only 5 of them are wise and 5 of them are foolish. And then in retrospect, 5 turn out to be not the bride. They prove themselves not to be part of the bride because they get left behind. The bridegroom doesn't receive them. So the warning is very dire. If you are an unbeliever, then you are going to be caught unawares. You're going to be caught off guard. You're like those in Noah's day that Brother Aaron is talking about, Brother Eggman's talking about, that they were eating, drinking, marrying, giving and marrying, right up until the day when the destruction came. Noah entered the ark, the destruction came. So it washed all the unbelievers away, those who were unprepared. Likewise with Lot. The inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah are the wicked people in the story that are simply eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, going about their daily lives, unaware that the angels that show up are going to rain down fire and brimstone down on top of them after they rescue Lot away from that place. So this is the very important lesson. And here's the part I'm trying to emphasize. Brother Eggman would bring it up, but I slowed down a little bit in the story to explain it to you. The unprepared state is for those who aren't truly believers. The description of those for whom the coming of the Lord / day of the Lord, in other words, the rapture, resurrection, the resurrection / rapture / day of the Lord. For those who are caught unaware, that indicates their state of heart, whether or not they really are looking for Yeshua or not. In other words, said a different way, Paul's going to say it this way, we, brothers and sisters who are in Messiah, are not children of the dark, so that the day should overtake us like a thief. Paul's going to state that in no unmistakable terms. So let's keep reading, Brother Eggman. I think he's going to bring Paul's quote in, and if he doesn't, we'll do it on our own. But what about the people left on earth who turn to Jesus when they see him with their very own eyes? What about the Jewish people left on the earth who give their lives to the Lord? What will happen to them? Although the Bible is not explicit in its explanation of how the day of the Lord will pan out for the people who give their lives to Jesus following the rapture, we do have some clues. Let's read Isaiah 26:20 through 21, which contained God's instructions to the Jewish people during the day of the Lord. Quote, here's Isaiah 26, verse 20 to 21. God, speaking to his people through the prophecy of Isaiah, says to Israel, quote, "Go, my people, enter your rooms and shut the doors behind you. Hide yourselves for a little while until his wrath has passed by. See, the Lord is coming out of his dwelling to punish the people of the earth for their sins. The earth will disclose the bloodshed on it. The earth will conceal its slain no longer." End quote. Notice before I jump forward into Brother Eggman's blog that even from Isaiah's perspective, God makes a distinction between his own people and the people of the earth. Did you catch that? You must catch this or you're going to misunderstand end-time prophecy, particularly as it pertains to God's people that we identify as the church, God's people that we identify as the nation of Israel, and everyone else who isn't identified as God's people. We have to at least see that in some way, shape, or fashion, the Bible identifies these three groups. We have the church, which is primarily made up of Gentile Christians, but not exclusively. There are Jews within the church, but when we look at the New Testament and the language that's given to us, we recognize that even in the time of the New Testament, there is a distinction made between the blinded nation of Israel and those from the nations who are not blinded. In other words, they're described as the Gentiles, right? Paul is sent to the Gentiles, right? He's the apostle to the Gentiles, i.e. the nations, the ethnos in the Greek, the goyim in the Hebrew. This is the people that largely receive the gospel and are recognized as the body of Messiah in the largest and broadest sense of the word. And yet at the same time, there is the remnant of Israel that's included in that description of the body of Messiah. In other words, if you're saved, whether you're Jewish or Gentile, you're part of the body of Messiah. And yet, it's no secret that the majority of those people who are saved by today's standards are mostly Gentile, right? That's not a secret. And this is not dispensationalism. You get that? It's not dispensational to say that the body of Messiah is mostly composed of Gentile peoples, nations. It's just a no-brainer. And that's the way that the New Testament also portrays it. At the same time, the nation of Israel, national Israel, is still God's people. So when God says, "Go, my people," he's talking about national Israel, but only those who have ears to hear are going to listen to God's voice, meaning ultimately it's the remnant of Israel that proves to be God's people because they're the ones who listen to God's voice in the end. So there's a part of people, of God's people, that aren't perhaps knowledgeable of the Messiah, but they are looking for and waiting for God's promises to come to pass, meaning they're in a place where their hearts are open to receiving the truth of God. They're not hostile to God's truths. Paul would call these people kind of, I'm forgetting the term, but it's in Romans chapter 14. Maybe the, gosh, I'm forgetting the term. How horrible. But the point being is, when it comes to national Israel, God's not just going to wipe everyone out because they don't believe in Jesus. But at the same time, the other extreme isn't going to happen either. He's not going to save all of Israel. All of national Israel is not going to be saved. And yet at the same time, not all of national Israel is just going to be discarded. So we have to find somewhere in the middle where some of Israel will be saved, but some of Israel will be lost. And that's where I'm describing remnant. Currently, and I've got to say this so that you don't misunderstand end-time prophecy and how it pertains to who's going to be raptured and who won't be. Currently, if you name the name of Jesus and you're Jewish, then you're part of the body of Messiah. Understand? You're not going to be left behind when the rapture takes place because you're part of the body of the elect that gets gathered when the rapture takes place. The rapture is an event meant to scoop up the body of Messiah. Right? When Jesus comes back, he's coming for his bride. He's not coming back for half of them and then leave the other half behind. I don't see any parts of the Bible that describe some partial rapture going on. I know that's a position that some people hold, partial rapturism, but I don't find any support for it myself. I'm looking for a rapture that's going to rapture at that moment all of those who are in Messiah, but not all of Israel. Because all of Israel doesn't believe in Messiah. So they can't be raptured at that moment. But at the same time, God tells Israel through the prophet Isaiah here, "Go, my people, and enter into your rooms and shut the door. Hide yourselves until the wrath has passed by." So what we're seeing is the language that's going to lend support for the principle of God protecting his people in the midst of judgment. You get that? So all of you Goshen principle, second Exodus, greater Exodus, people who say, well, we're going to go through the wrath and God's going to protect us. This is a great verse to have in your arsenal, right? This is a great verse because God clearly says, I'm going to, go somewhere where you're protected until the wrath passes by. This is clearly invoking Passover language. Right, where the people of Israel were told to go into their houses, shut the door, put blood on the outside, on the doorpost on the outside, and then go into the house, and the death angel will pass by you, or he will pass over you, right? The wrath of the death angel will go through Egypt, but he will not destroy you. The destroyer will not touch you because you've got the blood on your doors, and therefore it will pass by you. And so this is kind of the symbolism that's being invoked here. Go, enter into your room, shut the doors behind you, hide yourself for a while until the wrath passes by. So I think that warrants us very careful attention. Now let's let Brother Eggman explain his version. Right, I jumped ahead of him. Sorry, Brother Eggman. This passage is reminiscent of the story of Passover. I'm laughing because if I would have just let Brother Eggman talk, it wouldn't have had to waste all of my time there. The Israelites were living in Egypt as slaves under the cruel oppression of the Egyptian Pharaoh, when one day God rose up Moses to be a leader of the people and lead the slaves out of captivity. Pharaoh refused to let them worship God, so God sent plagues all throughout Egypt. The gravest of all the plagues occurred immediately before their exodus from Egypt. It was a plague in which the Lord would kill the firstborn of each son of each family in Egypt, unless they'd applied the blood of a lamb over the doorpost. Let me interject. Even in the Exodus story, God is making a difference between his people, Israel, and the wicked people of the world, symbolized in the story as the Egyptians. You must see that in order to understand that in the final days, when God pours out his tribulation and wrath and allows the tribulation of Satan to be poured out, God, of course, is in control of all of history. So in the very broadest sense, God is controlling all of Satan's actions. God is allowing Satan to pour out wrath on planet Earth. God is allowing Satan to persecute Christians. God is allowing Satan to persecute Jews, etc., etc. All of that is under God's supervision. And yet, at the same time, God is not directly punishing his own children. Understand?